The Ray Kinsland Leadership Institute is the umbrella organization for 3 culturally based leadership programs: the Cherokee Youth Council, the Jones Bowman Leadership Award Program, and the Duke Dunty Right Path Adult Leadership Program. They were developed based on community input and with funding from the Cherokee Preservation Foundation. The programs were housed separately until 2016, when they were brought together under the Cherokee Boys Club. I remember when the board of directors voted to accept the leadership umbrella as a department and to name it after Mr. Kinsland, who was at the meeting. His response was, "Well, if they're going to name something like that after me, I better be on my best behavior." The Ray Kinsland Leadership Institute adopted the 7 Cherokee core values as the foundation of all of our programming. These values were determined through community input as part of a strategic planning process. The 7 core values are group harmony, spirituality, strong individual character, sense of place, honoring the past, educating the children, and sense of humor. The following video is a testimony of how Mr. Kinsland demonstrated living the 7 Cherokee core values.
I think the strongest character that Brother Ray Kinsland possesses is his ability to work with different groups of people, whether it be the Cherokee, whether it be the white, whether it be other tribes. Race never enters into a situation where Mr. Kinsland is concerned. He's concerned about people as individuals. He's concerned about people's needs. I have watched him over the years working with everything from youth to adults to anyone who had a need. He was always there to reach out to them and try to help them.
Ray Kinsland is my dad. To talk about a relationship is going to be hard because there's so much to it. I think that, of course, my earliest memories involved him, but more specifically, my earliest memories involved his service to others. He was always doing something for other people. I can even remember Christmas Eve and folks calling needing gas, and he would leave us to go make sure people had gas, make sure people had food. And he used to come to me after I got a little older to talk to me about those things, to see if I understood why he did those things. And I did. I understood that we were well taken care of, that he wasn't so sure other people were, so he always stepped up to serve others.
Well, I think his character, I think he knew everybody in Cherokee, their names, but he knew their, today he'd say who their grandparent. He knew their grandparents, the parents, and little kids, and he remembers names. He was just good at remembering names, and he has a little blank book that I remember, but he has in there, the anniversaries of people, birthdays of people, and he'd be calling them if they're sick. He'd be calling them up. He says, "Do you need anything? What can I do?" But he was always that kind of a trait. He was just ready to give up whatever he had, but he did that more than once. And the other thing I think he did, he adopted some of the children here in Cherokee, in addition to his own kids. But he seemed to me, he just gave everything he had for Cherokee in the school system.
When he started teaching at Cherokee schools, he had not planned, of course, to be here long. And then after he realized that he wasn't going to be able to join the Army, he continued working and teaching at the school. He drove a bus. He helped with the Cherokee Boys Farm Club and the Cherokee Auto Club, which is how the Cherokee Boys Club was formed. He always believed, though, through his teaching, that students needed to be doing things. He wasn't the type of teacher that would stand up and lecture and have them sit at their seats and complete worksheets or write papers. He always he said he could teach more algebra by looking at a car engine than he could with a textbook. So he always believed in project-based learning before project-based learning even existed.
One of his biggest goals was educating people. And I don't know that necessarily had to be just kids, but educating people in general. He did take a lot of pride in wanting to have the best and for our schools, wanting to show the best for the kids as they were going wherever. It's just like the buses that we have. We always had a little bit better bus. Ray always wanted to have our kids and our people looking the best and being in the best that we could have. And that was one thing. It's just the educating part of that. When I looked at this first time, I knew that was probably something he was more into than anything, because he always thought of making something a little better, making our people a little stronger, and getting, an education is something that so many took for granted. We take it for granted today more so than we should when we can see it. But I know, just thinking of him, that was him educating the children. That was just Ray to a T right there.
I first met Ray Kinsland in 1962. I worked with the Bureau of Indian Affairs in the road program, and at the time, the Boys Club was just starting to be formed, and he worked in the garage department teaching young people in repairing cars. And he worked for the credit union. Used to be a bookstore, but prior to that was the instruction for the school. So it was an old building, it's all torn down, but he was there teaching the kids, and I was very impressed with him. He was teaching, and they were responding very, very good. That was prior to even the Boys Club.
He's been very involved in education, from actually teaching in the schools to being involved in the athletics of the school. And I guess that's probably best illustrated by the number of high school graduations he's spoken at. The senior classes down through the years have honored him by allowing him to speak at their graduations. I have no idea how many graduations he's spoken at. But in the 12 years that I have intimately been involved with him, he's spoken at, I don't know, I couldn't even begin to tell you how many, most of them.
I think Mr. Kinsland has had a huge impact on education with the children of this community in more than one way. From an actual direct standpoint, Mr. Kinsland has offered trade abilities when they were working here with the motor club and the farm club and in the beginnings of the Cherokee Boys Club. He taught several trade classes as an actual teacher, so he's helped teach the young men different skills and trades of labor. At the same time, once he became general manager of the Boys Club, he taught school bus safety to every child that come through the Cherokee system for over 30-some years. And so he would bring you down from your classroom via one of the school buses, help you get off the back of the bus with enactments of an emergency situation. And then he would also bring you in, show educational films, and just teach you how to be safe for your travels to and from school. At the same time, he's been involved with Cherokee athletics, for well over 50-some years. I'm guessing now, I know at one point he had made 60 years where he had not missed a high school football game. And so just things like that. His education, and we've already spoke about some of the pregame devotionals that he would give to the athletes and things of that nature. So from every aspect, whether it be directly through actual education opportunities or just simply how he carries himself and how the young people look up to him and how he understood from a very early age that there's always young eyes upon you, and the things that he was able to teach even us as players and future coaches as being able to lead by example and how we carry ourselves in the community. I think he's probably had a greater impact with all these young children, just knowing who Mr. Kinsland is, knowing the many different roles he's played, throughout his work in this community, knowing his love and compassion for the Cherokee people, especially the youth. He's had an educational experience every day of his life with someone here, and like I said before, I don't know of anybody that's ever spent any time or had any interaction with Mr. Kinsland that they regretted. I think everybody is better for having spent time with Mr. Kinsland.
As with any organization, there are times when leadership is challenged to maintain peace among the employees. And I'm sure, not being an employee of the Boys Club, I'm sure there were times when Ray had to make some unpopular decisions, but I'm sure that it wasn't a decision that he made without a lot of thought and prayer about it. So I'm not privy to how he was able to maintain harmony. But to me, when you have long-term employees, there must be something there with the leadership that people respect, and they're going to stay there. And then so many of our people have experienced the Boys Club programs in the job training, and so young people have been there for a lot of years, and many of them become employees. So there must be a lot of harmony maintained for people to want to stay in that kind of atmosphere.
He was all about group harmony. He wanted something to run like a well-oiled machine. He did not like strife between employee and managers, and you always had it, but Ray knew how to keep it to a minimal. One thing about him, he was always out. He'd come by and see each department, and that says volumes. That works volumes in people when they can see the general manager. And how you doing, Ray? Always shook your hand. How you doing? You need anything? How's things going? So yes, he kept harmony where very few people could, and at times it was probably disorganized harmony, but it's still harmony. You know, everything, you always get cogs in there that throw things for a loop, but Ray, he tried to keep it to a minimal just by being himself. I mean, it wasn't nothing special. It wasn't nothing that he went out of his way. It's just what he done. He knew and learned over the years to handle people and to deal with people. You've got to know people. And Ray knew most of his people anyway, I'd say.
But I think of what Jesus said in Matthew chapter number 5 in what's commonly called the Beatitude, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. And Ray certainly is a peacemaker. I've experienced many times him working to bring about reconciliation between individuals or groups. Never heard him talk negatively about anyone. He is always honest. You know, he doesn't sugarcoat situations, but he is not one to criticize, and he's always seeking to bring about harmony.
He did a lot of contracts with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, with the Cherokee Boys Club. And when they lost a document up there, he always had a replacement. And he could go back in his files 10 years and pull out a document and be what they needed.
I was fortunate to be able to be at the Boys Club a lot, you know, in working with the school. And while I was there, I was aware that people were calling Ray about what was going on. Even tribal council members were calling. And I discovered that Ray had a collection of the One Feather from the beginning. He had photos of events that happened in the last 50 years. And he became, to me, the tribal archivist. And when Bill Anderson from Western Carolina came to Cherokee, I happened to meet with him, and he said that he was looking for documents or some other documents or records of the tribe, and I asked him if he knew about Ray's collection, and he did not. So we went over to the boys' club, we introduced Ray, and they were amazed at Ray's care for what happened in the past because of his extensive archives. Well, the project ended up, the Western Carolina project, with funding from the Preservation Foundation. Ray's records are now at the Museum of the Cherokee Indians, so that his care of tribal history, and he could recall stories of people that are just memories, and his work to preserve the history, no one else had done that for this tribe. So, to me, he honors the past.
I believe if anyone understands a sense of place, I believe it's Mr. Kinsland. He has always been able to demonstrate his understanding of where he is, what he represents. And when I say that, I'm talking about not only does he have an understanding of this community, of this tribe, but I believe he has an understanding of his Christian values and his standards within how he would hold himself, his family, and all of the people he cares about in regards to. So I think he has a great understanding of not only what environment he's in at that time, but I think he represents the Cherokee culture as well as any enrolled member I've ever come across. I've had many discussions where a lot of people who come across and have contact with Mr. Kinsland do not understand that he's not an enrolled member of the tribe. They assume with his knowledge, his history of our people, his understanding of the Cherokee ways and culture, they just automatically assume, especially after the impact his life's work has had on this community, that he is an enrolled member of the Eastern Band. He's not. But I will tell you this, in my personal opinion, the fact that our tribe took the time to make him an honorary member and basically adopt him into the tribe, and we have documents here of that ceremony. To me, that perhaps could even say more than just being born into this society or being born into this tribe, because through his life's work and his efforts and the things he's done, this tribe asked him to be a part of that culture. So the integrity of that gesture, to me, may carry more weight than just someone who's simply born into it through blood. His character and his leadership and the efforts and the sacrifices he's made over the years made him so attractive to our tribe that we ask him to be a part of our family. So his sense of place probably is as strong as anyone I know in this area.
He was settled here. His dad worked here for 42 years. His dad's name was Goldman Kinsland. He worked for the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the facility management. So that connection has always been there. And Ray, to me, everything is Cherokee. You look at him, it's Mr. Cherokee Brave, Mr. Cherokee Brave. But he's always had a sense of responsibility here in Cherokee.
A person's sense of place is that you're going to be where you have family, you have wonderful feelings about where you live, your surroundings, and the fact that Ray and his family have lived here so long that, to me, he does have a strong sense of place. Not just physical place, but emotional and being tied in a community. So I've never understood others when they say it doesn't matter to them where they live. But I think it's been very important to Ray to be able to live here with us. I'm getting ready.
My dad always believed in putting other people first. He always believed in putting God first, then others, then himself last. And that's the way he still operates and believes to this day. He always says people before things. If you're in the middle of doing something and somebody's at your office door, you stop doing the something to deal with the person. And then he always said heavenly things before earthly things, that whatever you're working toward needs to be something of a higher calling in terms of priorities first. He is always very careful, I think, though. He knows Scripture backwards and forwards. He knows it well. He has it memorized. He has it hidden in his heart. He shares it with people. But he also is not judgmental in any way, shape, or form. He's very open to loving people regardless. He doesn't, that's one thing, that's a huge lesson that I've learned. And it's helped me in raising my own children. It's helped me as I'm leading here at the high school, that above all, people need love. And what they do sometimes you can't control. You can control the fact that you love them. And, that's just something that he did and still does.
I know for a fact he's a very devout Christian. His spirituality has helped guide me with my faith. Came to Mr. Kinsland on several occasions as a young man, and even today, current times, and often will ask him questions and seek advice. Being a football player from my Cherokee high school days, and then being an assistant later on, a head football coach for the same system, Mr. Kinsland would handle our pregame devotionals for every ball game. Very touching. He always had a very unique way of tying in whatever adversity or whatever scenario we might be facing as a team at that point in the season. He would have a way of tying that into a specific piece of scripture or a story out of the Bible that our kids could relate to, and it would often help us see the bigger picture on how to go up against whatever we felt like we were up against at the time. And by doing that, I know for a fact that he's helped a lot of young people in this community also with spirituality and a better understanding of faith. And I think his impact is probably a lot greater in that arena than he might even understand himself, aside from being a deacon at his church and the involvement he's had with his church family. But I think with his prayer and his devotions and things of that nature that he's given to many young student athletes, he's had a major impact.
Ray's best attribute in his life was his spirituality, because he wanted to make sure that what you've seen up here is what you got over there or what you got everywhere else. And that's what kept him as humble as he was, because there's many times I'd ask Ray, even before he got to the point where he was going downhill, how you doing? I could always remember his answer. He'd always say, far better than I deserve. And that was Ray. So I think that's what kept the boys club and his family life together, is his spirituality.
I have a good sense of humor, and Ray and I have often traded jokes back and forth. I'll share one with you just told me last night, which he said was a true experience. But a couple of weeks ago in the church, I always ask a Bible question every week for the people. And the question a couple of weeks ago was Samson, who was one of the judges in the Old Testament, killed 10,000 Philistines. And I asked the question, what weapon did he use? And the answer was the jawbone of an ass or a donkey. And so Ray told me last night of a preacher that wasn't able to read very well, perhaps not even able to read at all, but was a good listener and listened to what people said. And he had heard other preachers talk about this story. And he was preaching from the pulpit one time and said, Samson killed 10,000 Philistines by jabbing them in the ass.
one aspect of Mr. Kinsland that most people are aware of if you've ever spent any time with him is that he has a great sense of humor. Mr. Kinsland has told numerous jokes. I remember several different jokes throughout the years. A few stick out in my mind as some of my favorites. But even beyond just being able to tell a joke, his timing and his sometimes his questioning of should I tell a joke, I think were some of the greatest virtue that he would bring to the table for us, because being a head football coach for many years, Mr. Kinsland would understand the severity of the game. It might be a rival game. It might be a game that would decide the championship. It might be a playoff game that would extend your season. And he would take a read on the feel of the team. And he would often come to me as a head coach, and he would say, Coach McCoy, he'd say, are we a little uptight? And I'd say, Mr. Kinsland, I think we might be a little uptight tonight. And he would say, you think if I told a joke, it would help kind of break up the atmosphere a little bit and ease our minds before we go into this. And, I would always say, anytime you want to crack a joke, Mr. Kinsland, please do so, because I've never seen it have an adverse effect on our guys. And so some of the times when we were probably in much need of relief, whether it be through his comedy or whatever, he was able to provide that. And he would they would always be harmless jokes, but he would have a great way of often tying in that rival school or the situation with some type of humor, and he would tell some jokes sometimes about, he would mention a rival school, and he would say, man, he said, before we get started with tonight's devotion, I want to just let you know there's been a great tragedy in one of the local communities, and I want you to keep them on your mind. And he would lead on to say that, the local library at that school system burnt to the ground earlier today. And he would go on to say that they lost all 3 books, and 2 of them weren't even colored in yet. So he would take a joke. Like I said, it was a harmless punch at a rival school or an opponent that we were getting ready to play, but it would be just enough that the kids would crack a smile or laugh a little bit, and I think it would take them away from some of the pressures of what they were up against later on that night. And it was just perfect timing for our kids and to create some of that relief for us. But he has a great sense of humor, and he's told many, many jokes. And I always found it to be a beautiful thing that the coaches that would come into our community who had coached in other communities, and they would come in, and he would do a great job of helping those coaches feel welcomed, and he would always be able to crack some type of joke and let them know that, as a staff, we were going to work very hard, and we were going to keep our focus and our agenda as a priority, but we were going to have a good time while we were doing so. And so I think he made a lot of teachers and coaches and players feel very welcomed with his humor. And like I said, it was always had perfect timing, in my opinion.
My dad has a great sense of humor. You can't meet him on the street, at a ball game, at church, at the store, without his telling a joke or a funny story. And he always says most of them are true. He says that's why he could never write a book, because nobody would believe it. But he tells one story that really happened from many years ago. The funny thing is he doesn't tell everyone because he didn't want a lot of people to know, but I'm going to share it. When Ed Taylor was chief, he was asked to go speak at a Boy Scout program one afternoon, and he agreed to go. And a few weeks before he was supposed to go, he found out he needed to be in Washington, D.C. for a really important meeting. And so he contacted the Boy Scout leader and asked to reschedule. And the Boy Scout leader said, well, why don't you just, instead of rescheduling, why don't you just record your speech on a cassette tape and send that to us so the boys can still hear your speech? So Chief Taylor agreed to do that. The point was, or the problem was, he didn't want to speak into a cassette player to record his speech. So he took the cassette, the speech, and the address to my dad's office, laid all of those things on my dad's desk, and said, I hear you do a good impression of me. I need you to record this speech onto this cassette tape in my voice and send it to this address. And basically just walked out, and my dad was in shock, but knew that because Chief Taylor had asked him to do it, he wanted to do it. The funny thing was, everybody in the office, all of the employees in the Boys Club office, wanted to take the cassette tape to the post office for Dad to mail it because, of course, they wanted to make a copy. But instead of doing that, he came home because he lived right there at the Boys Club as long as he was the general manager there, locked himself up in the bathroom, and recorded Chief Taylor's speech in Chief Taylor's voice, and ended up mailing that to the Boy Scout troop leader. So somewhere out there is this tape.
Ray has always led by example. He was never one to ask somebody to do a job that he wouldn't do. During the time that he served as general manager of the Boys Club, his hours literally was 24/7. Being the church being so close to the Boys Club, I would often be here maybe 10, 11 o'clock at night in my office doing some study and start to leave, and Ray would be out patrolling the grounds. Bus drivers would come in off of a charter trip. He always was here to check them in. I made the statement before he resigned that it would take several men to do all the jobs that he was doing. He never, ever said, "This is your job, you take care of it." It was always, "Let me help you do that job."
I think some of the traits that make Mr. Kinsland an unbelievable leader are simply the fact that he never tried to abuse any of the powers or any of the leverage that he had with his position. And what I mean by saying that is that Mr. Kinsland was always looked up to by many different groups of people. There were many different circles here on the boundary that would look up to Mr. Kinsland, whether it be through his role in the church, whether it be through his role with our school system, the athletic programs, or even his role as the general manager of the Cherokee Boys Club. I once heard a reference made to the desk of the general manager here that there were times when the general manager could make things happen maybe even faster than the chief in this community. And I once went to Mr. Kinsland and I said, "Mr. Kinsland," I said, "I heard a great compliment about you today." And he said, "What was that, Scooter?" And I said, I heard that at certain times and certain aspects, I said, you as the GM of the Cherokee Boys Club could make things happen, even faster than possibly the chief at the time." And he laughed and he shook his head, as to tell me that that was not the case. But he did give me some great advice. He said, "I'll leave it at this." He said, "If a man ever comes into any type of power, he only has that power because he chose to never abuse it." And I thought that that was a great way of looking at when people do have responsibilities and they do have leverage to make things happen for their community, to not let it go to their head or to not let it muddy the waters in their thought process as to making sure that everything they do, if they do have the potential to help, that they help others before themselves, and they never let that go to their head or to get in the way of what potential they might have. And so now, being that I'm in the same desk, which I never would have thought of in my life, years ago as a young kid and coming up through the school system here and playing athletics, and I never in my life thought I would have the privilege of sitting behind the same desk that he once did for over 50 years. And to be in that same role, I think about the things he said of that nature, and it helps keep me in line. It helps keep me humble to make sure that I put the community first and take care of everyone else before I would ever think about trying to take care of myself personally. I am in no means trying to say that I'm anywhere close to what Mr. Kinsland was, but taking small pieces of aspects of his leadership and the abilities that he possessed and displayed, I think make me a better leader. And I still got a long ways to go, but I do try. So.
My dad graduated from North Carolina State University in February, and he had planned to join the Army in June with a few of his other college buddies. They were going to go in as officers. They'd finished their degrees, but his friends weren't finished yet. They were going to graduate in May, so they decided to go in June. So my dad returned to Cherokee to work on his dad's dairy farm. The superintendent at the time was the superintendent of the agency and the school. So the superintendent called him and said, "Hey, Ray, I need a I wanted to say CTE because today it's career and technical vocational. Okay. The superintendent called him and said, Ray, I need a vocational teacher. And my dad said, well, I'm going to go into the Army in June, so I don't want to take the job and start something and make that commitment when I just have to leave in a few months. And he said, well, our vocational teacher's father is very ill, and so he's having to return home, so we're without one. So if you could just fill in for him for the next few months, then we'll find one for the next school year. So Dad agreed to do it. And the agent and the superintendent's secretary came out to the dairy barn on my grandpa's farm and had a portable typewriter and typed my dad's application. And that was like on a Friday or a Saturday, and that Monday he started working at the school. He taught vocational education, agriculture education, and May of that year he was baling hay where the Cherokee Elementary School used to be, and there was some hay stuck in the hay baler, and he reached in there to get it out, and it cut 3 of his fingers off. And of course he talks in great detail about picking them up and putting them in his pocket and going to the hospital and having his fingers sewn back up. But what's more significant is he talks about the fact that had he not cut his fingers off, he would have joined the Army. And had he joined the Army, we don't know how the Cherokee Boys Club would be here today. Now, he says God would have made a way anyway, but he also believes that he was used. The reason his fingers were cut off so he would stay here, and the Cherokee Boys Club could be what it is today, and the school could be what it is today. As a leader, my dad always believed that you lead from the front. That if you're a boss, you try to lead from behind and just tell everybody who's in front of you what to do. But he always believed as a leader, as a true leader, that you had to be in front and that you pulled everybody else along with you.